Rosalind arrived in the riverboat gala, wearing diamonds and a smile that hid panic. Her family estate was weeks from foreclosure, and Corbin, the charming lender, demanded a public engagement tonight at the valet line. A limping dad named George steadied himself on a cane while holding his little girl's hand. Rosalind scoffed, tossing him her keys like he was invisible. Then George noticed the loan contract peeking from her clutch, read the predatory terms, and made one call before the champagne toast ended. The creditor's account froze and Corbin's grin died. George wasn't her valet. He owned the debt. Silently. The Mississippi River stretched like black silk beneath a sky bruised with twilight. Moored against the French Quarter docks. The riverboat blazed with golden light, its paddle wheel still, its 3 decks draped in white linen and fresh magnolias. Jazz floated from the main salon, a trumpet crying sweet and low, a piano rolling underneath like distant thunder. This was New Orleans at its most seductive, a city that knew how to dress its secrets in silk. On the promenade deck, men in tuxedos clinked crystal glasses while women in gowns that cost more than most cars laughed at jokes that weren't funny. Everyone here had come to be seen, to broker deals behind smiles, to measure their worth against the jewelry hanging from someone else's neck. A banner hung above the grand staircase, elegant script announcing the charity gala hosted by the family whose name had graced New Orleans society for 4 generations. But behind that gilded name, the accounts were bleeding dry. Rosalind stepped from her limousine like a queen ascending her throne. Her gown was midnight blue, scattered with crystals that caught the lamplight. Her blonde hair was swept into a perfect chignon, her makeup flawless, her posture immaculate. She looked like a woman who had never known a moment of doubt in her life. But beneath the diamonds circling her throat, her pulse hammered so hard she feared someone might see it. Tonight was the night Corbin would demand his answer. Tonight. Before all of New Orleans society. She would have to say yes to a man who made her skin crawl, or watch her family lose everything her great-grandfather had built. The contract in her clutch felt like a lit fuse against her hip. Rosalind's father, William, waited near the gangway, his face pale beneath his tan. His breathing labored from the short walk from the car. He was 63 years old and looked 75. Years of bad investments, of desperate loans taken to maintain appearances, of pride that wouldn't let him admit failure. They had carved deep lines into his face and stolen the strength from his frame. He still wore his grandfather's pocket watch, still stood with his shoulders back, still believed that dignity could somehow save them. He was wrong. Her mother Helen stood beside him, elegant in silver, her eyes holding a sadness she tried to hide. Helen had seen this coming years ago, had begged William to sell some holdings, to downsize, to stop the bleeding before it became fatal. But William had refused. A man of his standing did not retreat. A man of his standing did not admit weakness. And so Helen had watched, helpless, as the tide rose higher and higher, until now it was lapping at their children's feet. Helen caught Rosalind's hand as she passed, squeezed it once. Her eyes said everything her lips could not. You don't have to do this. But William's hand on Rosalind's back said something else entirely. You must. And there was Corbin, standing at the top of the gangway like he owned the boat. The river, the city itself. He was 42 years old. Handsome in the way of men who spent serious money on their appearance, teeth too white, skin too smooth, suits cut so precisely they seemed painted on. His smile was warm as summer honey, and just as sticky. He'd built his fortune buying distressed debt, then leveraging it to take what he really wanted. Money bored him. Power was the game. And tonight, he intended to add Rosalind to his collection. He extended his hand to help her up the gangway, and his fingers closed around hers just a moment too long. When he leaned in to kiss her cheek, his whisper was soft as poison. "Smile. Darling, the photographers are watching. And remember one word tonight, just one little word, and your family keeps their home." His grip tightened briefly on her wrist. "Refuse, and I activate the reputation clause. You'll be ruined before breakfast." Rosalind smiled. It was the smile she'd practiced in the mirror 1,000 times bright, confident, empty. Inside, she was screaming. At the valet station below, a different kind of arrival was taking place. George pulled his 10-year-old sedan to the curb, the engine coughing once before falling silent. He stepped out slowly, reaching for the cane that had been his constant companion for the past 8 years. His left leg didn't bend the way it should anymore, and on humid nights like this, the old injury ached deep in the bone. He wore clean khakis and a pressed white shirt, respectable, but clearly not guest attire. A little girl scrambled out of the passenger side, clutching a small canvas bag to her chest. Bonnie was 9 years old, with her father's dark eyes and her late mother's stubborn chin. She carried herself with a quiet dignity unusual in a child her age. And she had a habit of watching people's faces the way others watched television, absorbing, analyzing, understanding more than anyone realized. George had taken the valet coordination job as a favor to an old friend, a way to keep busy on a Saturday night while Bonnie did her homework in the staff area. He could have been anywhere else tonight. He could have been in a penthouse overlooking the city, in a boardroom, on a yacht of his own. But George had learned long ago that the view from the top wasn't worth the cost of getting there. And these days, his only ambition was making sure his daughter grew up knowing what really mattered. He limped toward the valet station, Bonnie's hand warm in his. His cane clicked against the cobblestones in steady rhythm. A few guests glanced his way, then looked through him, the way wealthy people often looked through those who served them. George didn't mind. Invisibility had its advantages. That was when Rosalind's limousine pulled up. George moved forward to open her door, but Rosalind was already stepping out, moving fast, her eyes fixed on the gangway where Corbin waited. She barely glanced at the man with the cane, just thrust her keys toward him without looking. "Don't scratch the car." Her voice was clipped, dismissive. "I don't have time for mistakes." The keys hit George's palm with a sharp slap. A few guests nearby chuckled at the exchange, amused by the rich girl putting the help in his place. Rosalind was already walking away, her heels clicking against the pavement. But Bonnie wasn't laughing. She stood very still, her dark eyes fixed on Rosalind's retreating back. When she spoke, her voice was clear and curious, carrying in the humid air. "Are you scared of something?" Rosalind froze mid-step, for just a heartbeat. Her mask slipped, something raw and frightened flickered across her face. Then the mask was back, harder than before. She didn't turn around. She didn't answer. She just kept walking, faster now. Her clutch pressed tight against her side. And that was when George saw it. As Rosalind moved, her clutch shifted, and a corner of paper slipped free from the clasp. George's eyes, trained by years of scanning contracts, of catching the details others missed, locked onto the visible text. He saw the words penalty interest. He saw reputation damages. He saw default acceleration and property seizure. He recognized the format, the predatory structure, the carefully buried clauses designed to trap the unwary. He knew that kind of contract. He'd spent years fighting against the men who wrote them. George knelt down, pretending to adjust Bonnie's jacket collar. His voice was soft, meant only for her. "You okay, sweetheart?" Bonnie nodded, but her eyes were still on the gangway, where Rosalind had just taken Corbin's arm. "She's not mean, Daddy. She's scared, like the rabbits when they know the hawk is coming." George followed his daughter's gaze. He watched Corbin's hand settle on Rosalind's lower back, watched the almost imperceptible flinch she couldn't quite hide. He watched the older man, who must be her father, gray-faced and sweating despite the evening breeze. He watched the elegant woman who must be her mother, her smile too bright, her hands clasped too tight. A family drowning in plain sight, surrounded by people who either didn't notice or didn't care. George straightened slowly, his bad leg protesting. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. Archie answered on the second ring. "Sir, I need you to check something for me. There's a family here tonight, old money, New Orleans, charity gala hosts. Find their debt structure, specifically anything held by Corbin Reeves." A pause. "Corbin Reeves, the vulture, the same, and Archie. If what I think is happening, I want to know every dirty clause in that contract within the hour." "Understood, sir." George ended the call and looked at his daughter. "How about we find you a quiet spot to draw while Daddy does some work?" Bonnie smiled, the first real smile since they'd arrived. She loved drawing almost as much as she loved her father, as George led her toward the staff entrance. She was already pulling her colored pencils from her bag. On the main deck, the party was reaching its glittering peak. A jazz quartet played "When the Saints Go Marching In," as waiters circulated with champagne and oysters. The dance floor was filling, couples swaying in the warm glow of paper lanterns. But the real business of the evening was happening in whispered conversations, in meaningful glances, in the subtle negotiations of the wealthy. Corbin had Rosalind on his arm like a trophy, introducing her to investors, to politicians, to society matrons who cooed over her gown while their eyes calculated her worth. He never let her stray more than a foot from his side. His hand remained on her back, her arm, her shoulder constant reminders of his control. William watched from the bar, nursing a bourbon he couldn't afford, his face a mask of forced joviality. Helen stood near the railing, staring out at the dark water, her silver gown catching the moonlight, in a quiet corner of the staff area. Bonnie sat cross-legged on a storage crate, her pencils moving across paper with focused intensity. She was drawing the scene she'd witnessed at the valet station, a woman in a beautiful gown, her face hidden behind a glittering mask, a man in a fine suit with a snake coiled where his tie should be. And off to the side, a figure with a cane, standing straight despite his bent leg, his hand holding a smaller hand, a little girl who watched everything. George made 2 more calls while his daughter drew. The first was to Finn, who worked in the compliance department of one of the city's largest banks. "I need you to run a trace on accounts connected to Corbin Reeves. Specifically, look for irregular payment flows, shell company transfers, anything that might trigger a fraud hold." Finn's voice was cautious. "That's sensitive territory. George, what are we looking at? Predatory lending, possibly document fraud, definitely moral bankruptcy, but that's not illegal yet." A dry laugh. "Give me 30 minutes." The second call was to Ingrid, a lawyer whose reputation for methodical destruction of unethical contracts had made her both feared and famous in certain circles. "I'm sending you a partial image of a loan document," George said. "I need you to identify the structure and find any procedural violations." "Tonight," Ingrid's voice was sharp with interest. "Must be important. A family's about to lose everything because they signed something they didn't understand. Sound familiar?" A pause. When Ingrid spoke again, her voice was softer. "Send it. I'll have something for you within the hour." George pocketed his phone and looked at his daughter's drawing. The snake man was grinning. The masked woman was crying behind her mask. But the little girl in the picture was smiling, because she knew something the others didn't. "That's really good, sweetheart." Bonnie looked up at him with solemn eyes. "The snake man is going to get in trouble, isn't he?" "Daddy?" George smiled. "Maybe. Sometimes the good guys win." "You're going to help the scared lady." George knelt down, ignoring the protest from his leg. "I'm going to try. But Bonnie helping people doesn't mean they'll thank you for it. Sometimes they're too proud, or too hurt, or too confused. We help because it's right, not because we expect anything back. Do you understand?" Bonnie nodded slowly. "Like when you helped Mr. Martinez, even though he yelled at you first." Exactly like that. On the upper deck, the moment Corbin had orchestrated was approaching. The MC took the microphone, calling for attention. Waiters began distributing fresh glasses of champagne. A spotlight swung toward a small platform near the grand staircase, where a microphone stand waited. Rosalind felt Corbin's hand on her elbow, guiding her toward the platform. Her stomach heaved. Her mother caught her eye from across the deck, and Helen's expression was anguished, desperate, silently begging, "Don't do this." But William was there too, nodding firmly. His message clear. This is the only way. Save the family name. Do your duty. Rosalind had spent her whole life doing her duty. She had studied what her father wanted her to study, dated whom her mother approved, worn what society expected. She had perfected the art of being exactly what everyone else needed her to be. And now that art was going to cost her everything. Corbin leaned close as they approached the platform. "Remember, darling, one word, just one little yes. And all of this unpleasantness goes away. Your father keeps his dignity, your mother keeps her social standing, and you keep me happy." His grip tightened on her arm, hard enough to leave bruises beneath her silk sleeve. "I suggest you keep me happy." The MC was speaking. Something about love and partnership and the joining of two great families. Rosalind heard it as if from very far away. She was watching her mother's face crumble, watching her father's hands shake around his glass, watching her whole life narrow to this single, terrible moment. And then she saw him. George had come up from the staff area, moving quietly along the edge of the crowd. He wasn't watching the platform. He was watching her. And his eyes held no judgment, no pity, no expectation, only a calm, steady attention that felt more real than anything else in this room full of masks. Their eyes met for just a moment. Then George's phone buzzed, and he turned away to answer it. Corbin was accepting a microphone now, launching into a speech about finding one's perfect partner. Rosalind's vision was starting to tunnel. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She was about to trade her life for her father's pride, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. George listened to Archie's voice in his ear, his expression unchanging. "Sir, I've confirmed it. Corbin Reeves acquired the family's primary debt 3 months ago through a shell company. The contract includes a reputation clause that triggers immediate default if any family member causes public embarrassment or controversy. It also includes a compound penalty interest rate that's illegal in 6 states. And there's more. Go on. Finn found irregular transfers in Corbin's accounts, money moving through 4 different entities before landing in his primary holdings. Classic structuring to avoid fraud detection. He's filed the suspicious activity report. Compliance is reviewing it now. George watched Corbin gesture expansively on the platform, his white smile gleaming. How long until the hold kicks in? Could be any minute. Once the system flags it, his accounts freeze automatically pending review. And Ingrid, she found 3 procedural violations in the contract execution: improper disclosure, coerced signing environment, and a clause that contradicts Louisiana consumer protection law. It won't void the debt, but it's enough to invalidate the worst provisions. George nodded slowly. Thank you, Archie. All of you. Sir, what are you going to do? George looked at the platform, where Corbin was now reaching into his pocket for what could only be a ring box. He looked at Rosalind's frozen smile, her white knuckles, her eyes that had gone glassy with suppressed tears. What I should have done years ago. Stand in the light. On the platform. Corbin dropped to one knee. The crowd gasped and cooed. Cameras flashed. The MC was practically weeping with theatrical joy. Rosalind, Corbin said, his voice carrying across the hushed deck. Will you make me the happiest man on the Mississippi? Rosalind's lips parted. The word was right there, ready to escape like a trapped bird. Yes. Just say yes. Save your family. Surrender your soul. Yes. And then Corbin's phone buzzed. He ignored it, his smile unwavering. But it buzzed again. And again, his expression flickered annoyance, confusion, something darker. He pulled the phone from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and all the color drained from his face. Excuse me one moment, he murmured, standing abruptly. Technical issue, nothing serious. But the crowd was already murmuring. Phones were appearing in hands. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else whispered about bank problems, frozen accounts, fraud investigations. Corbin stabbed at his phone, his composure cracking. This is impossible, he hissed, low enough that only Rosalind could hear. Someone did this. Someone! His eyes swept the crowd, searching, calculating. They landed on George. The man with the cane stood at the edge of the gathering, utterly calm, utterly still. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He was simply watching, the way a chess player watches an opponent realize they've been trapped. Corbin's eyes narrowed. Something about this limping nobody felt wrong, felt dangerous. But he was Corbin Reeves. He didn't lose to valets. He snapped his fingers at the security team. That man, the one with the cane, he's been harassing guests all evening. Remove him. The guards moved forward. George didn't retreat. He simply stood his ground, his hand finding Bonnie's shoulder as she appeared at his side. Her drawing clutched to her chest. This man touched my car, a woman said suddenly, one of Corbin's associates, clearly coached. I saw him going through the glove boxes. He made inappropriate comments to me, another woman added, her voice too loud, too rehearsed. The crowd was shifting now, ugly with the sudden thrill of drama. Guards were closing in. Bonnie pressed closer to her father, her eyes wide but unafraid. George's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Touch my daughter, and there won't be a court in Louisiana that can protect you. The guards hesitated. There was something in his tone that didn't match his clothes. something that spoke of power they couldn't see, but could definitely sense. Bonnie looked up at Corbin, her child's voice carrying clear across the deck. "You're lying. All of it. You're lying about everything." Silence. The kind of silence that falls when truth has been spoken by someone too young to know she should be afraid. Corbin laughed, but it was thin, brittle. "The child is confused. Remove them both." "Wait." Rosalind's voice surprised everyone, including herself. She was stepping forward, moving away from the platform, away from Corbin, toward the confrontation at the edge of the crowd. "I want to know what's happening." "Rosalind, darling, this doesn't concern you. Everything that happens on this boat tonight concerns me. You made sure of that." She turned to George, her eyes searching his face. "Who are you? What do you want?" George met her gaze steadily. "I want you to ask yourself a question. Have you actually read every clause in the contract you're about to sell your life for?" Rosalind's hand went involuntarily to her clutch. "That's none of your— the reputation clause, the one that triggers immediate default if you cause any public embarrassment. Did you read it carefully? Did you notice it doesn't define public embarrassment? Did you notice that Corbin can interpret any action, any refusal, any hesitation, any moment of independent thought as a violation?" The color drained from Rosalind's face. "How do you know about that?" "Because I've spent years fighting contracts exactly like it. Because men like Corbin don't want money, they want control. And because—" He paused, something shifting in his expression. "Because I know what it's like to have everything taken away by someone who thinks the rules don't apply to them." Rosalind stared at him, at his cane, at his calm, weathered face, at his daughter, who was watching her with eyes that saw too much. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Before George could answer. Corbin grabbed Rosalind's arm, yanking her back toward the platform. "Enough of this circus! Rosalind, answer the question, now!" "Let go of her!" Helen's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. She had pushed through the crowd, William stumbling behind her, and her eyes were blazing with a fury years in the making. "Let go of my daughter, Corbin, right now!" Corbin's mask finally cracked. "You don't get to make demands. I own you. I own your house, your reputation, your future. One word from me, and you're living on the street by next week." "Then say the word," George said quietly. "Activate the clause. Make your threats real." He stepped forward, his cane clicking against the deck. "But before you do, you should know something." The crowd had gone deathly silent. Even the jazz had stopped. Everyone was watching as George reached into his jacket and pulled out a single folded document. "The debt you're using as a weapon, it doesn't belong to you anymore. You sold it 3 weeks ago to a holding company based in Delaware. That company is a subsidiary of a trust. That trust," he let the moment hang, "is controlled by me." Corbin's face twisted. "That's impossible. The buyer was anonymous. There's no way—" "The buyer was anonymous because he wanted to see exactly how you operated before he revealed himself. I wanted to know if you were really as predatory as your reputation suggested." George's voice was flat, implacable. "You exceeded expectations." Archie appeared at George's shoulder, materializing from the crowd like a ghost. He handed Corbin a folder. "Transfer documents. Legally binding. Notarized. The debt now belongs to Mr. George Harrison's trust. Effective midnight tonight." Corbin tore through the documents, his hands shaking. This is fraud. This is commerce," Ingrid said, stepping forward. Her suit was immaculate, her expression cold. The same kind you've practiced for years. The difference is, we followed the law. Can you say the same?" She held up her own folder. 3 procedural violations in the original contract: insufficient disclosure, coerced signing environment, and a penalty clause that violates Louisiana consumer protection statutes. Any judge in the state would invalidate the worst provisions. Finn joined them, his bank credentials visible on a lanyard around his neck. And then there's the matter of your account transfers. 4 shell companies. Structured deposits designed to avoid fraud detection. The compliance department flagged it 20 minutes ago. Your accounts are frozen pending investigation. Corbin looked from face to face, his empire crumbling in real time. The crowd was murmuring, phones recording everything. The social standing he'd spent years cultivating was evaporating like morning mist. He turned on Rosalind, his final weapon shame. "This is your fault. You brought this on your family. I didn't bring anything." Rosalind's voice was stronger now, steadier. She pulled her arm free from his grip, stepping back, standing taller. "You did. You preyed on my father's pride and my mother's fear and my desperation. You turned our weakness into your opportunity. That's not love. That's not even business. That's just cruelty dressed in a nice suit." She turned to George, and her eyes were bright with tears she was finally allowing to fall. "I don't know who you are. I don't know why you did this, but—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "But I threw your keys at you like you were nothing. I insulted you in front of your daughter. Why would you help someone who treated you like that?" George looked at Bonnie, who was still holding her drawing, still watching everything with those solemn, seeing eyes. "Because my daughter was watching. Because the kind of person I want her to become is the kind who helps people even when they don't deserve it, especially when they don't deserve it." He stepped closer to Rosalind, close enough to speak quietly. "And because 8 years ago, I was hurt in an accident at a dock your family owned, a dock where safety violations had been ignored for years. I lost my leg. I lost my wife, who couldn't handle the aftermath. I lost everything I thought mattered." Rosalind's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, God. I didn't come here for revenge. I came because I learned a long time ago that revenge doesn't heal anything. It just spreads the pain around." And he glanced at William, who had gone gray. "Your father knows what I'm talking about. He's been carrying that guilt for years, even if he's never admitted it. I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to let what happened to me turn me into someone Bonnie couldn't be proud of." William stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know about the dock, the violations. My managers, you didn't want to know," George said quietly. "That's not the same as not knowing. But tonight isn't about blame. Tonight is about stopping someone else from being destroyed the way I was." He turned back to Rosalind. "The debt is real. Your family still owes it. But not to Corbin, to me. And I'm offering new terms, reasonable interest. Extended timeline, no reputation clauses, no control, just a debt, paid back honestly, at a pace you can manage." Rosalind stared at him. Why would you do that?" "Because that's what I wish someone had done for me when I needed it." He looked at his daughter again, and his expression softened. "And because Bonnie asked me to help the scared lady. She saw what I almost missed, that you weren't cruel. You were terrified. And terrified people sometimes do cruel things." Bonnie stepped forward, holding out her drawing. It showed the scene at the valet station, but in her child's interpretation. The masked woman's face was visible now, streaked with tears she'd been hiding. And the snake man was small, shrunken, powerless. "I made this for you," Bonnie said to Rosalind, "so you could see what I saw." Rosalind took the drawing with trembling hands. She looked at the little girl who had seen through her armor. She looked at the father who had every reason to want her family destroyed, but had chosen mercy instead. She looked at her own mother, who was crying freely now. And her father, who seemed to have aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. She knelt down, bringing herself to Bonnie's level. I was terrible to your father. I threw keys at him. I made fun of him in front of everyone. And I'm so sorry. Bonnie studied her for a long moment. Are you going to be different now? Not just sorry, but different. Rosalind closed her eyes. When she opened them, something had shifted. The mask was gone. The fear was still there, but it was honest now, acknowledged. Yes, she whispered. I'm going to try. Bonnie nodded slowly. She didn't smile, didn't offer easy forgiveness, but she reached out and patted Rosalind's hand once, briefly, a conditional acceptance, a chance earned, not given. Corbin made one last attempt. You think this is over? I have lawyers, I have connections, You'll face a fraud investigation, Finn said flatly. And when they start pulling threads, they'll find more than just structured deposits. My compliance department is very, very thorough. And I'll be watching, Ingrid added. Professionally, with great interest. Security guards were approaching now, real ones, not Corbin's hired muscle. Someone had called the authorities. Corbin looked around at the faces that had fawned over him an hour ago, now cold with distaste, alive with the particular pleasure people take in watching the mighty fall. He left without another word, surrounded by guards who were no longer taking orders from him. The crowd parted to let him pass, and not a single hand reached out to help. Later, when the chaos had settled and the guests had dispersed into the New Orleans night, George stood at the railing with Bonnie, watching the moonlight dance on the Mississippi. The jazz had started again. Softer now, more melancholy. The boat rocked gently against its mooring. Rosalind approached them slowly, her heels in her hand, her hair escaping its perfect chignon. She looked younger without her armor, more human. My mother wants to talk to you, she said, about the accident, about what really happened. She says she always knew something was wrong with the official report, but William wouldn't let her pursue it. George nodded. Tomorrow, tonight. Everyone needs to rest. Rosalind stood beside him at the railing, looking out at the same dark water. What happens now, with the debt? I mean, now your family does the hard work, sells some assets, downscales, lives within real means instead of borrowed illusions. It's not glamorous, but it's honest, and honest has a way of being enough. And you, what do you get out of all this? George smiled slightly. I get to go home with my daughter and know that today. The good guys won one. He looked at Bonnie, who was starting to drowse against his side. That's enough for me. Rosalind was quiet for a long moment. Then, you could have destroyed us. You had every reason to. I could have, George agreed. But Bonnie would have seen. And what we do when we have power over others, that's who we really are. I decided a long time ago who I wanted to be. He gathered his sleepy daughter in his arms, balancing carefully on his cane, before he turned to leave. He looked at Rosalind one more time. You asked me earlier why I care what happens to you. The truth is, I didn't. Not at first. But then I watched you tonight. Really watched you. The way you protected your mother with your eyes. The way you tried to shield your father from his own pride. The way you froze when Corbin touched you but smiled anyway. Because you thought it was the only way to save the people you love. He paused. That's not a bad person. That's a scared person who's been taught that sacrifice is the only form of love. Maybe now you can learn a different way. Rosalind watched him go, his cane clicking against the deck, his daughter's head resting on his shoulder. The river breeze caught her hair, and for the first time in months, she could breathe. Behind her, Helen touched her shoulder. "Rosalind, are you all right?" Rosalind turned to face her mother. The tears were gone. Something else was there now. Something that looked almost like hope. "I think," she said slowly, "I'm going to be, but it's going to take work, real work, starting tomorrow. We sell what we need to sell. We pay what we owe. We become the kind of people who don't need someone else to save us." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "And your father?" They both looked at William, who sat alone at a table, staring at his empty glass. The pride that had sustained him for so long was crumbling, and what lay beneath was fragile, frightened, very old. "He's going to need help," Rosalind said. "But help, not saving. There's a difference." She took her mother's hand. "George taught me that." On the dock, George settled Bonnie into the car seat, tucking her favorite blanket around her shoulders. She stirred slightly, mumbling something about snakes and masks. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart? Did we do good tonight?" George smoothed her hair back from her face. "We did what was right. That's better than good." "Is the scared lady going to be okay?" He thought about Rosalind's face when she'd knelt before his daughter, about the moment the mask had finally fallen away, about the long road ahead of her, and the chance, just a chance, that she might walk it with her eyes open. "I think she might be," he said. "In time, if she chooses to be." Bonnie smiled sleepily. "Good. I liked her, underneath the scared parts." George climbed into the driver's seat, his leg protesting the movement. The engine started on the first try this time, purring to life like it knew they were going home. As he pulled away from the dock, the riverboat blazed behind them, still beautiful, still golden, but somehow smaller now, less impressive. Just a boat full of people, some better than they seemed, some worse, all of them trying to find their way through the darkness. The Mississippi rolled on, as it always had, and somewhere in the New Orleans night, a family was beginning the hard work of learning to save themselves.